It was an ordinary morning, and the husband had a brilliant idea. He knew his wife was always busy with work, managing the house, and taking care of everyone. She never asked for much, but he could see how hard she worked. He wanted to do something special, something unexpected, to show her how much he loved her. Their anniversary was just around the corner, and he figured it was the perfect opportunity to surprise her. He spent the morning planning, his mind racing with ideas. He knew his wife enjoyed the little things, simple gestures that showed he paid attention to what made her happy. He thought about cooking her favorite meal, but he wanted to do something even more memorable. Then he had it. He would transform their bedroom into a beautiful romantic surprise. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a cozy, intimate setup to make her feel cherished. The husband got to work immediately. He started by arranging candles all around the room. He placed them carefully on the bedside table, the shelves, and the windowsills. Their soft, flickering light would set the mood perfectly, he thought. He wasn't the best at decorating, but he knew how to make the space feel warm and inviting. Next, he found her favorite flowers, beautiful roses, their petals a deep shade of red. He arranged them in a simple vase and placed them on the dresser. It wasn't much, but the husband knew it would mean the world to her. He thought about the quiet evenings they spent together, talking, laughing, and simply being in each other's company. Those moments meant everything to him, and he wanted to create another one. He went to the kitchen and whipped up a light, homemade dinner. He didn't need anything fancy, just something delicious and comforting to share. As he worked, his excitement grew. He couldn't wait for his wife to come home and see what he had done. He imagined her walking into the room, her eyes lighting up as she took in the soft glow of the candles, the sweet scent of the roses, and the warmth of the evening he had created for her. He pictured her smile, the way she would look at him with love and appreciation. It was going to be a perfect evening, or at least that's what he hoped for. The clock ticked by, and the husband continued preparing, checking every detail. Everything had to be just right. He couldn't wait to see her reaction, to feel the joy of giving her something she wasn't expecting. He thought about the joy of surprise, how it always brought people closer, and he wanted to make sure this moment would be something they could both treasure forever. By mid-afternoon, he received a text from his wife. She'd had a long day at work and was going to be a little late. At first, he was disappointed. It meant he'd have to wait a little longer. But then he thought about how it would only make the surprise even better. He could make sure everything was perfect. The husband spent the extra time double-checking the candles, fluffing the pillows on the bed, and making sure the dinner was ready. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. His anticipation grew as the hours passed. He kept glancing at the clock, wondering when his wife would walk through the door. He couldn't help but smile to himself. This was going to be great. He couldn't wait to see her face, to show her that he appreciated everything she did. He imagined how she would look when she walked into their room, surprised, happy, and maybe even a little teary-eyed from the thoughtfulness of it all. It was the kind of moment he'd always wanted to give her. As he waited, his heart raced. He had planned this for so long, and now it was finally coming together. He was proud of what he'd done, and he hoped it would be everything she deserved. He imagined the look in her eyes, the way she would react when she saw everything he had prepared for her. He couldn't wait for her to finally arrive and see the surprise he had been planning for days. The clock on the wall ticked louder as the husband's excitement built with every passing minute. His wife was still not home, and the anticipation was beginning to feel like an endless waiting game. Each minute seemed to drag on longer than the last. He glanced at his phone again to check if there was any new message. Her workday had run late, and she texted him to let him know she wouldn't be home as soon as they'd both hoped. He smiled at the message, trying to understand that sometimes work had to come first. Still, he couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. With every second that passed, he imagined her walking through the door, her tired face lighting up as she saw the surprise he had prepared. He pictured her reaction to the soft glow of the candles, the flowers he had arranged with so much care, and the warmth that filled the room. He hoped it would all be worth the wait, but the waiting itself was becoming difficult. He busied himself with checking everything once again. He made sure the candles were lit just right, the fragrance of the roses filled the air, and the soft music that played in the background added a sense of calm. Everything was as perfect as it could be, but the longer he waited, the more his nerves started to get the best of him. What if she didn't like it? What if it wasn't the surprise he had hoped for? He shook those thoughts away quickly. This was about showing her how much she meant to him. Nothing could ruin that. As the minutes went by, he found himself pacing around the living room. His mind raced with possibilities. What if she had a rough day and didn't feel like being surprised? Or what if she had already guessed what he was planning? He pushed those worries aside and reminded himself that this wasn't about perfection. It was about the effort and love he had put into making her feel special. He tried to occupy himself with small tasks, wiping down the kitchen counter, making sure the meal was still warm and fresh. But everything felt like it was happening in slow motion. He kept checking the time. Would she be home soon? He wished he could take away the nervous energy that was building inside him. The quiet house seemed so empty without her. He longed to hear her voice, to know she was on her way home, so they could share this moment together. Then, just as he was beginning to lose track of time, he heard the sound of keys jingling at the door. His heart skipped a beat. It was her. She had finally arrived. He quickly turned off the stove, making sure everything was ready for when she walked in. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, and smiled as he waited for her to enter. The door creaked open, and in she stepped, just as he had imagined. She looked tired but still beautiful, carrying the weight of her day on her shoulders. She didn't notice the setup in the bedroom yet. The husband's heart raced as he stood, eager to guide her into the surprise he had prepared. He called to her from the hallway, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed his excitement. "Hey, honey, can you come here for a second?" She looked up, a little surprised by the unusual tone in his voice. "What's going on?" she asked, her eyes scanning the hallway as she walked toward him. He grinned, his excitement now bubbling over. "I have a little surprise for you. I want you to see something," he said, leading her toward the bedroom. Her eyes widened, curiosity instantly taking over as she followed him down the hall. He opened the door slowly, letting her step inside first, wanting to see her face when she took in the scene he had created. The soft candlelight reflected off the walls, casting a gentle glow that made the room feel like something out of a dream. The fragrance of the roses lingered in the air, and the table was set for their quiet dinner. The room looked cozy and inviting, and he could see the smallest hint of surprise in her expression. As his wife stepped into the room, her eyes scanned the setup, taking in the romantic scene that the husband had worked so hard to create. For a brief moment, everything was perfect. She smiled, her tiredness momentarily fading as she looked around at the candles, the flowers, and the dinner waiting for them. Her eyes softened with appreciation, and for a moment, the husband felt a wave of relief. He had done it. This was going to be the perfect surprise. But just as he began to relax, something unexpected happened. She sighed softly, looking a little apologetic. "I'm sorry I'm late, honey. Work just. It was one of those days," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the long hours she put in. He smiled, trying to brush off his disappointment. "It's okay. I'm just happy you're home," he said, walking toward her. He reached out, gently taking her hand. "You've been working so hard. I just wanted to do something nice for you." She nodded, squeezing his hand in return. But as she stood there, taking in the room once more, the husband couldn't help but notice a flicker of something in her eyes, a hint of confusion, maybe even hesitation. It wasn't the kind of reaction he had expected. "I don't mean to be rude," she started slowly, "but why did you do all this? I mean, I appreciate it so much, but you didn't have to." The husband's heart sank a little. Had she not been as happy with the surprise as he had hoped? He quickly tried to explain, his voice filled with nervous energy. I just wanted to show you how much you mean to me. You're always so busy, and I know how hard you work. I thought you'd like this, something to unwind. She gave him a small smile, but the look in her eyes wasn't the one he had imagined. It was as if she were trying to process the gesture, but something about it didn't sit right with her. She hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. I think I understand why you did this, she said softly. But honey, you know I'm just not the romantic dinner type. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. I would have been happy with a quiet night in with you, just us. The words stung more than he expected, but the husband wasn't angry. He knew his wife well enough to understand that, for her, big gestures weren't as important as quiet, simple moments. She wasn't the kind of person who needed grand surprises or elaborate plans. She just wanted to be with him, sharing the small, everyday things. He felt a knot form in his stomach. What if he had misjudged her? What if he'd made the mistake of thinking she'd want something she didn't? He didn't want her to feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed by his efforts. He just wanted her to know how much he cared. It's not about the dinner, or the flowers, or the candles, he said, his voice soft but sincere. It's about making sure you know how much I appreciate everything you do. I didn't want you to feel like you're doing it all alone. She took his hands in hers, giving him a reassuring smile. I know you appreciate me, and I love that you want to do this for me. But what really matters to me is that you're here, with me, after everything. That's all I really need. The husband's heart lightened a little, but he still felt a pang of regret. He had hoped to surprise her, to show her in a way that felt big and meaningful. But perhaps he had misread what would make her happy. Maybe for her, it was simply the idea that they could spend time together without any expectations or pressure. I'm sorry if I overdid it, he said, a small smile creeping onto his face. I just wanted to make you feel special. You do make me feel special, she said, pulling him into a hug. You don't need candles and roses for that. Just being you is enough. The husband hugged her back tightly, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. He had feared the surprise would be a disappointment, but now he realized that the true surprise was seeing just how much she valued the quiet moments they shared. The grand gesture, as beautiful as it was, wasn't what mattered to her most. It was the everyday love that she cherished. With that realization, the husband smiled to himself, grateful for the lesson he had just learned. The husband stood in the quiet of the room, his arms wrapped around his wife, as they shared that comforting hug. For a moment, time seemed to slow down, and the world outside the bedroom felt far away. All of his worries from earlier, the planning, the nerves, the hopes for the perfect surprise, seemed to fade away with the warmth of her embrace. It wasn't the grand surprise he had imagined, but in that moment, he realized it didn't need to be. She pulled back slightly, her hands still resting on his arms, her expression softer now. Thank you for doing this, for trying so hard, she said with a smile. I really do appreciate it. The husband smiled back, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. I just wanted to make sure you knew how much you mean to me, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. Well, you do, and I know it's not easy to surprise me. I'm not the type for big romantic gestures, but that doesn't mean I don't love you any less for it. His wife's words helped ease the tension he had been feeling. He had spent so much time focusing on the details of the surprise that he had forgotten what really mattered. Being present, being together, and showing love in simple, everyday ways. He realized then that sometimes the most meaningful moments don't come from the grandest of plans. They come from the heart. How about we skip the formal dinner and just have a quiet evening? She suggested, her eyes twinkling with warmth. I think we both could use a little relaxation after a long day. The husband agreed without hesitation, his heart lightened by the thought of spending time with her in the way she truly appreciated. They moved toward the couch, the candles casting a soft glow over the room. They didn't need an elaborate dinner or a set of perfect arrangements to enjoy each other's company. The simple act of sitting together, talking, and sharing the evening was enough. They settled onto the couch, and for the first time that evening, the husband felt the weight of his nerves completely disappear. The surprise hadn't gone as planned, but perhaps that was for the best. He reached over and turned off the music, letting the room fall into a comfortable silence, broken only by the quiet hum of the house. His wife nestled into his side, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know, this is exactly what I needed," she said softly. "Just being here with you. No pressure, no expectations, just us." He wrapped an arm around her, feeling more content than he had in hours. "I'm glad," he said, his voice filled with tenderness. "I don't need anything else either, just you." They sat there in the soft glow of the candles, the quiet atmosphere soothing after the flurry of emotions earlier. The husband realized that, while the night hadn't gone as he had hoped, it had still turned out to be something special. They were together. They understood each other more deeply now, and that was the most important thing of all. The couple spent the next few hours talking about everything and nothing, catching up on small details of their day, laughing about old memories, and making plans for the future. As the night stretched on, they both found themselves at ease, happy with the simple connection they shared. There were no grand surprises, no extravagant gestures, but the love they felt for each other was undeniable. As the evening wore on, the husband realized something important. Sometimes, the best moments aren't the ones you plan for. They aren't the ones filled with big surprises or carefully arranged details. Instead, they come from the quiet moments you share with someone you love, just being together and enjoying each other's company. That was the true surprise, finding contentment in the simplest of moments. With that, they decided to call it a night, turning off the lights and crawling into bed together, their hearts full. No need for anything more. In the end, the evening had turned out to be exactly what they both needed, nothing more than a simple, loving moment shared between two people who meant the world to each other. The husband and wife had spent the evening enjoying the simplicity of each other's company. The tension from earlier had melted away, replaced by a comfortable peace that wrapped around them like a cozy blanket. They had shared a quiet dinner, laughed about small things, and even found time to reminisce about old memories. The evening had turned out better than the husband had imagined. Though it wasn't exactly what he had planned, it had still felt special. Just as they were beginning to settle into the calm of the night, something unexpected happened. The husband, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders, suddenly heard a strange noise, a faint but unmistakable sound coming from the hallway. It was as if something had shifted or moved in the other room. For a moment, he froze, unsure of what it was. "Did you hear that?" he asked his wife, his voice low and cautious. His wife looked up at him with a puzzled expression, clearly not expecting any disturbance after the quiet evening they had been enjoying. She nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the room as if trying to find the source of the noise. "It's probably just the wind," she said, though her tone was slightly unsure. But the sound had been so distinct, so strange, that neither of them could completely shake the feeling that something was off. The husband rose from the couch, a mix of curiosity and concern prompting him to check the hallway. "I'll go see what it is," he said. His wife, still a little uneasy, followed closely behind him. They both made their way quietly down the hall, trying to make sense of the odd noise. As they reached the doorway to the bedroom, the husband's heart skipped a beat. The room, which had seemed perfectly still just a short while ago, now felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but something felt wrong. His eyes scanned the space, looking for the source of the disturbance. At first, nothing seemed amiss. The candles were still flickering gently, the flowers still in place, and the bed was made as they had left it. But then something caught his attention. The window, which had been securely closed before, was now slightly ajar, allowing a cold draft to blow through the room. He hadn't noticed it before. Had he forgotten to close it? "Did you leave the window open?" he asked, turning to his wife. She shook her head, her face showing concern. "No, I definitely closed it earlier," she replied, stepping forward to examine the window. A chill ran down the husband's spine as he realized that something just didn't add up. Maybe we should check the rest of the house," he suggested. His voice was steady, but there was a note of unease in it now. His wife nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and mild alarm. They spent the next few minutes moving through the house, checking the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked and secure. Each room seemed fine, nothing unusual, nothing out of place. But still, the feeling of unease lingered. What had caused the noise? And why did it feel like something wasn't quite right? Finally, they returned to the living room, their minds still racing as they tried to make sense of what had happened. "Maybe it's just our imaginations," the wife said, though there was a slight tremor in her voice. She gave her husband a small smile, trying to ease his concerns. He sat down on the couch again, trying to calm his racing thoughts. "Yeah, maybe," he agreed, though he wasn't convinced. Something about the night had changed. It was as if the calm they had enjoyed was now tainted by an unknown presence, an unspoken tension that neither of them could shake. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. It was a strange feeling, this mixture of comfort and uncertainty. They had started the evening with such high hopes, but now there was a subtle shift in the air, something unspoken between them. They both knew that something had happened, but neither of them could explain it. The husband looked over at his wife, her face still marked by a hint of worry, and he realized that no matter what was happening around them, they had each other. In that moment, he decided that no matter how strange or unsettling things seemed, they would face it together. "We're okay," he said, his voice softer now, more reassuring. "Let's just relax. Maybe it was nothing." She nodded, leaning against him as they both tried to shake off the unease. But deep down, they both knew that something had shifted. The night had taken an unexpected turn, and while they couldn't explain it, they were both determined to face whatever came next, side by side. As the night continued, the husband and wife sat in the living room, trying to push the unsettling feeling to the back of their minds. They had checked the house, made sure everything was secure. And yet, the strange noise and the feeling that something was off lingered in the air like an uninvited guest. Neither of them wanted to admit that they were both a little shaken by what had happened, but the tension was undeniable. The husband glanced over at his wife, who sat beside him, her eyes distant, as though she, too, was trying to make sense of the strange events. Her usual calm demeanor seemed to be replaced by a slight unease. He reached over and gently took her hand, trying to offer some comfort, though he too was still grappling with the mystery of what had happened. "I don't know," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "It's probably nothing, but it's been bothering me all night." She nodded, squeezing his hand in return. "I know. It's like something just shifted. I don't know what it is, but I can't shake it either." The room fell into another heavy silence. The husband looked around the room, his gaze landing on the dimly lit candles and the soft, glowing light they cast on the walls. Everything was calm, almost peaceful, and yet the earlier unease refused to leave. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something they couldn't understand. After a few moments, his wife stood up, her expression thoughtful. "Maybe we should just go to bed," she suggested. "It's been a long day, and I think we both could use some rest." The husband hesitated. He wanted to agree with her, wanted to return to the comfort of their bed and forget about the strange happenings of the evening. But something inside him felt uneasy about letting it go. He wasn't sure why, but a part of him didn't feel right about just ignoring it. "I guess," he said, standing up as well. "I don't know. I just keep thinking that there's something we missed. Maybe I should check the rest of the house again, just to be sure." His wife looked at him with a mixture of concern and patience. "I think we've checked everything, honey. We're safe here. Maybe we just need to stop thinking about it." He looked into her eyes, seeing the same uncertainty he felt mirrored in her gaze. He knew she was right. They had checked everything. But the nagging feeling wouldn't go away. There was something about the way the window had been left open, the strange noise they had heard, and the sudden shift in the atmosphere that made him feel like there was something they weren't seeing. Still, he didn't want to keep worrying her. He took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, maybe you're right. Let's just get some sleep. They both headed to the bedroom, their steps slow and deliberate, as though they were walking through a fog. The husband was still trying to shake off the lingering unease, but the more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't. They climbed into bed together, the softness of the sheets a small comfort as they both lay down in silence. The husband turned to his side, his back to his wife, his mind still racing. The house was quiet now, too quiet, but eventually the steady rhythm of his wife's breathing calmed him. Slowly, his own body relaxed, and he began to drift off to sleep. But just as his mind was starting to quiet, the faintest sound broke through the silence. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make him snap his eyes open. His heart skipped a beat. The noise was back. He lay there in the dark, listening intently. The noise was coming from the living room, faint but unmistakable. It sounded like something, or someone, was moving around. The husband's pulse quickened as he slowly turned to face his wife. She hadn't heard it. Not yet. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely a breath. She stirred slightly, blinking as she woke. "What? What is it?" The husband sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't want to wake her, but the sound was too persistent, too clear to ignore. He stood up slowly, trying not to disturb her, and quietly made his way toward the door. He was determined to get to the bottom of it this time. As he stepped into the hallway, the sound grew louder. He wasn't imagining it. It was real. And this time, he wasn't going to ignore it. The husband stepped quietly into the hallway, his heart still pounding in his chest. The sound he had heard earlier in the living room now seemed closer, almost as if it was coming from just around the corner. His breath caught in his throat as he moved cautiously, trying not to make a sound. His wife was still in the bedroom, unaware of the noise he had just heard, and he wasn't sure if he should wake her or investigate it on his own. But the feeling that something was wrong was too strong to ignore. The house felt strangely still as he walked down the hallway. The dim light from the candles in the living room flickered, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the walls. The closer he got to the source of the noise, the more the air seemed to thicken with tension. It wasn't the usual silence of the house. This was something different. It was as if the space itself was holding its breath. As he reached the doorway to the living room, the sound became clearer. It wasn't just a creak or a rustle. It was more like the soft shuffle of footsteps, as though someone was walking around, but carefully trying not to be heard. His heart skipped a beat. He froze for a moment, unsure whether to move forward or turn back. His mind raced, thinking through every possible explanation. Had someone broken into the house? Was it an animal? No, this wasn't right. It felt too deliberate, too calculated to be anything as simple as that. His hand instinctively reached for the doorframe, his knuckles white with the pressure of holding onto it. He tried to steady his breathing, to calm himself, but the sense of unease was overwhelming. The noise had stopped for a moment, and in that silence, the husband listened intently. Nothing. No more sounds, but he wasn't fooled. It was there. He was sure of it. Slowly, he pushed the door open, just a crack, his eyes scanning the room. Everything appeared normal, at first glance, at least. The candles were still burning, casting their warm, flickering glow across the room. The furniture was exactly where it had been. The dinner table, once set so carefully, stood untouched in the corner. The roses on the table still looked fresh, their petals soft and inviting. But the husband's senses told him something wasn't right. His gaze drifted across the room, his eyes landing on the window that had been slightly ajar earlier. It was now wide open, the curtains fluttering gently in the breeze that had picked up. The cold air sent a shiver down his spine. He couldn't remember ever leaving the window like that. Had his wife opened it? No, she hadn't mentioned it. The thought of someone entering through the window made his stomach tighten. He stepped into the room, his feet making no sound against the wooden floor. He moved carefully, cautiously, as though whatever was in the room with him might still be there. His eyes darted to every corner, every shadow, but everything appeared to be still. He walked slowly toward the window, his fingers brushing against the edge of the sill. The cool air brushed his face, and for a moment, he let himself just stand there, trying to piece everything together. How had the window opened? And more importantly, what was the noise? He had been sure he'd heard something. Someone, or something, moving around. Then he heard it again. A faint sound, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his blood run cold. It was the softest of movements, like the shuffle of feet across the floor. It came from behind him. The husband spun around, his heart racing. His breath caught in his throat as he strained his eyes, trying to see through the dim light. There was no one there. No shadow moving, no figure standing in the room. But the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. He felt it like a weight pressing down on him. And suddenly, the room felt a lot smaller. Panic surged through him, and without thinking, he rushed back toward the hallway. He had to check on his wife. Had she heard the noise too? Was she safe? As he reached the bedroom, he pushed the door open, his mind still racing. His wife was sitting up in bed now, her face etched with concern. She had heard the noise too. He could see it in her eyes. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice filled with unease. "I heard something too. What's happening?" The husband stood there for a moment, his hand still on the doorframe. His breath was heavy, his mind spinning. He didn't know how to explain it, but he knew one thing for certain. They weren't alone. "I don't know," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "But we need to stay calm. I'm sure it's nothing, but we need to be careful." The wife looked at him, her concern deepening, but she trusted him. Together, they could figure this out. Whatever it was, they would face it as a team. But the night had changed. The once peaceful evening was now filled with tension, and neither of them knew what was waiting for them next. The night had taken an unexpected turn. The peaceful evening that had begun with so much hope and excitement now felt unsettling, and the quiet moments they had shared earlier seemed far away. The husband and wife sat on the edge of the bed, still unsure of what had happened. The strange noises, the open window, and the sudden shift in the air all hung between them like an unanswered question. They knew something was out of place, but neither of them could explain it. The husband took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had always been the one to keep calm in moments like this, but tonight felt different. There was something about the way the house felt, almost as if it had a life of its own. He looked over at his wife, whose face was pale but determined. "I think we should call someone," she said, her voice steady but filled with concern. "Maybe it's just some strange coincidence, but I don't want to take any chances." The husband hesitated. He knew she was right. Something had changed, and they couldn't ignore it. But part of him didn't want to admit that they might be dealing with something beyond their understanding. He had never been the superstitious type, but tonight, something about the whole situation was making him question everything. "I'll make the call," he said, his voice quiet. "Let's just make sure everything's safe. We don't need to panic, but it's better to be cautious." He stood up, feeling the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. His wife stayed in bed, watching him, her eyes filled with trust. She knew he would take care of it. She always did. And even though she had felt the same unease, she wasn't as sure as he was that calling someone was the right choice. Still, she didn't argue. She didn't want to let fear get the better of them, but it was hard to ignore the growing tension in the air. The husband grabbed his phone from the nightstand and dialed a number he hadn't expected to use tonight. The quiet hum of the ringing tone filled the silence in the room, making the atmosphere feel even more oppressive. He didn't know who else to turn to, but he had to do something. After a few moments, the line picked up, and a calm voice on the other end of the phone said, "Hello." "Hi," the husband said, trying to keep his voice steady. "This might sound strange, but my wife and I are hearing some odd noises in our house. We're not sure what it is, but it feels off. Could you come by and check it out?" There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, and the husband's heart beat faster. He knew it sounded crazy. Who calls someone about noises in their house? But something told him they couldn't ignore it. Finally, the voice spoke again. "Of course," the voice said calmly. "I'll be there shortly. Just stay where you are, and don't open the door to anyone else. We'll take care of it." The husband sighed in relief. He hung up the phone and turned to face his wife. She was still sitting on the bed, her eyes wide, but there was a small sense of relief in her expression. "Someone is coming," he said. "They'll help us figure this out." She nodded, but the uncertainty was still there. "Do you think we're overreacting?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we've been through a lot tonight. It's better to be safe than sorry." They both sat there in silence for a while, the sound of the wind outside the only noise filling the room. The house, once so familiar and comforting, now felt strange and foreign to them. They could only wait now, wait for answers. Minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. The husband stood up quickly, his heart racing again. He opened the door cautiously, half expecting to see someone else, but instead, a professional with a calm demeanor stood on the doorstep, ready to help. "We'll take a look at the house and make sure everything is in order," the professional said, offering a reassuring smile. "You're not alone in this." The husband and wife followed the professional inside as they began to check every corner of the house. They moved through the rooms, inspecting windows and doors, making sure everything was locked and secure. The husband couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him as each room was checked. There was nothing that suggested anything unusual. Finally, the professional turned to them, a small smile on his face. "It seems your house is perfectly safe," he said. "Sometimes the mind plays tricks on us, especially when we're stressed. I think what you were hearing was just the wind and the house settling. Nothing to worry about." The husband and wife exchanged a glance, both of them feeling a sense of both relief and confusion. It had been a long night, and though they didn't fully understand what had happened, they were glad to have answers, even if those answers weren't what they had expected. As the professional left, the couple stood together in the doorway, watching him disappear into the night. The house felt calm again, the tension lifting slowly, but they both knew one thing for certain. They would never forget the strange, unsettling feeling of that night. And while they might never fully understand it, they had each other, and that was enough.